Who picks a fight with Canada? Honestly, the spending battle in Congress continues. Elon needed Trump to do a Tesla commercial because the stock is tanking. It only cost Elon a few $100 million. Speaking of people who are getting wise, Elon's lack of popularity is affecting Trump as his current poll numbers, Trump's, on the economy are about as bad as he's ever seen. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54. Ravi, before we get started, you have some live appearances coming up, including one that I think involves me.
Yes. Well, I'm finally ready to talk about my book. So my novel comes out in just under 2 weeks. It's called Garbage Town. It's a coming-of-age thriller set in Staten Island, New York in the 1990s. It's about a group of kids growing up in the shadows of the Fresh Kills landfill, which is the largest garbage dump the world has ever seen. They discover something they shouldn't have found and basically have to fight for survival, and they have to grow up really fast. And so it really is a coming-of-age thriller, but it's really, I think of it as a period piece. It's really about the nostalgia for the 90s when we would ride bikes around our neighborhoods and use AOL Instant Messenger and pagers and weren't glued to our phones all the time and perhaps weren't so divided by our politics. So I think if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or if you grew up later but are nostalgia for a period of time you didn't experience, you'll love that. And, hopefully you'll find it just to be a really thrilling story. We've been getting really, really good reviews, including from a former politician from Missouri who said it's like Goonies meets Goodfellas. So
it's a great book, man. It's a great book. I got the hard copy. I was honored to be the first blurb at the top.
Yes.
Back,
so. And so people can go out and pre-order.
The blurb is my cousin Sam, which was pretty cool. So
yes, I need to get more members of your family in there. Yeah, Diane, I got to ask Diana next. I was going to save her for the nonfiction book, but people can go out to Amazon, or you could support your local bookstores by going to bookstore.org, and you could actually have it sent straight to your local bookstores, which is always a great way to pre-order because it then tells your bookstores that you're interested in the book. But if you live in a couple cities, we're coming to you. So March 31st for the folks out in St. Louis at Left Bank Books, you and I will be speaking at that event together. We'll mix the politics and the book. March 27th in New York City at P&T Knitwear, which will be that evening in the Lower East Side. March 30th in Staten Island at St. Andrews, and maybe Kansas City. You and I are talking about, we have one potential date. If you live in Kansas City and know the bookstores there very well, or have a venue, where we could try to do something on the 1st if we can make it work. And here's my promise to you: if you put together a great event and help me put it together, I promise I will sign as many Kansas City books, go Chiefs, as you asked me to do. That will be
pretty good
if you buy the book,
Yeah.
So that's what I promise you.
That's City. How you sell a book. Shamelessness.
So come through, Kansas City. I would love to stay in your state one extra day. And because I haven't been back there since we did that whole catastrophe at the Arrowhead Stadium that time. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, let's start talking about politics here.
Well, catastrophes, actually, inelegant transition here, but there's been a lot of back and forth with our neighbors to the north about tariffs. We'll get into the line by line, but I think the emotional content of it is best summarized in this clip of Doug Ford, who, mind you, is the conservative leader of Ottawa and basically the opposition leader. This is what he had to say yesterday.
On the electricity. Stay tuned.
So what does that look like? What are the potential responses?
Well, we'll see. I'll talk to the team and we'll make an appropriate response to President Trump. Again, I stress, this is not the American people. Canadians know it. And if we go into a recession, it's self-made by one person. It's called President Trump's recession, which shouldn't be this way. We should be booming both countries right now.
I realized I forgot to give people the URL before. So go to garbagetownbook.com. Now, Doug Ford, Trump recession. I love that. That should be in ads.
Yeah. Also, I mean, it says a lot that you have. I mean, there's some pretty contentious politics going on right now in Canada as well, like separate from everything else, right? Like you just had, I think Trudeau was just replaced by his own party as the leader of the party. And then you have, these folks are slugging it out, and they all seem to agree on one thing, which is they're all against Trump and they all blame Trump for economic woes in Canada and in the United States. That says a lot, I think. He's managed to unify Canada, but not us.
Yeah, I spent the morning reading through articles across the U.S. political spectrum about tariffs. And I would say that even the...
God bless you for doing that sort of thing. I'm just never going to do it. So thank you.
Well, I was just trying to get the measure, whenever people, one thing for sure about our country is anytime serious people with serious amounts of money are at stake, they are much more likely to tell the truth when it's the money at stake than our ideals or maybe lives of both Americans and Ukrainians. But once those dollars, people start talking.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example here is the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which is a Murdoch paper. This used to be like the most reactionary conservative opinion page. Now, I do want to give them credit. They've been speaking some truth on Ukraine, and they've been speaking truth on tariffs. They've written a bunch of pieces.
Well, they've always been. It's not like they've been socially conservative, right? I mean, they are the definition of country club conservatism.
Yeah, and they were a little weak in their knees heading into this election around like both sidesism and all that. But look, that is not even the 1,000th fight I would want to fight. But they wrote a piece today basically saying two things. One, tariffs are bad on substance, and the herky-jerky nature, the will they, won't they on tariffs is bad on its own merits. And so this is how I would talk to people in your life about this, which is like, look, if you happen to have a weird friend who like has a really substantive and robust defense of tariffs, or just like a very basic one, which is like, hey, we should build more shit here, which is not totally wrong, obviously. So you don't want to fight them on that point. You could say, look, like you could be right. But what's happening here is that every single day, and I think the Wall Street Journal said, we don't know, like we have to basically wait to see what side of the bed Trump wakes up in the morning to find out what our tariff policy is that he keeps going back and forth. And even people like Alcoa CEO, the Alcoa aluminum company, are saying things like, we just can't plan. And that means we're just not going to invest. And the markets have been jittery here. And look, like there's been some good news economically, like a little bit here. Like today, there was some somewhat favorable inflation data where the inflation numbers came back 0.1% better than what the economists were predicting, which was not great numbers. And so that temporarily paused a consistent slide in the markets. But it might not even last till the end of the day. You and I are recording midday, but following that inflation news, which was somewhat positive, although completely divorced from tariffs because it was the February numbers that didn't bake in any of the implementation of tariffs or any of the new herky-jerky stuff we've seen. By the end of the day, we've already seen Canada announcing today that it's going to impose 25% tariffs on more than $20 billion worth of U.S. goods in retaliation for Trump putting these tariffs on steel and aluminum. These tariffs from Canada cover steel and aluminum, as well as other U.S. goods, including computers, sports equipment, cast iron products. And they will take effect tomorrow. And if you're an audio listener, the day you're listening to this podcast, these are on top of the 25% counter tariffs that Doug Ford in Ottawa had already implemented. And so this is a pretty big deal. And this comes as Trump faces the worst numbers on the economy that he has ever seen in terms of his polling numbers.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Americans are like, wow, oh yeah, I forgot about the chaos from the first Trump administration. And now, I mean, it seems like at least a slight majority of Americans accepted the Trump narrative in the 2024 election about the 16 to 20 economy, right? Not all Americans, but a slight majority at least settled for the idea that, the economy was going fine until the pandemic happened. And so, let's just judge him pre-pandemic. Like there were enough people that did that. I disagree with that, but there were enough people that did that, right? And now what I think it's making people remember that, he was super chaotic and he couldn't make up his mind. And that was a huge problem even before COVID. And now he seems to be doing that with a lot more economic stuff. Prior to COVID, he didn't do this kind of stuff. You know, he talked about tariffs, but he didn't do this crazy, like whiplash back and forth thing. The tariffs were nowhere near as substantial. They certainly didn't start the moment he got in, and he didn't start this level of trade wars. And so I think it's just like you said, it's making people who are otherwise willing to tolerate him be like, well, now you're messing with my money. And they don't like that.
Well, and also people within the White House, and this was a separate Wall Street Journal article, his economic team, and this feels very first term. Everybody's like, I don't know what's going on. Trump is announcing things. I don't know where they're coming from. The Commerce Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, everybody seems at odds. Commerce Secretary is floating like that they're going to like pull back tariffs. Other people are surprised, and then they have to try to push Trump to do what they're asking. This is all going on while people in business are lobbying Trump to have either carve-outs for their protected businesses or to levy tariffs against their opponents, or in some cases both, which is why, you know, I've been at various points susceptible to an argument for tariffs because I don't love the global supply chain reaching places where there's human rights abuses, lack of labor protections, and also anti-competitive behavior, like what we see in places like China. So like if you were to make an argument just on strictly non-economic grounds for tariffs at various points, I'm very susceptible to those arguments. The problem is when you put it in the hands of somebody like Trump, historically in the US, this is where a lot of the late 1800s, early 1900s corruption came from. And there's nobody more susceptible to somebody walking through the door and getting a carve out and donating the right amount of money or investing in the right Trump business or just saying the right flattering thing and getting a carve up, which means that what winds up happening is not that tariffs are improving American domestic business or harming China. It's just improving Trump's standing and leading to a lot of complexity and corruption, which is essentially what I think we are today.
This is the problem with when right-wing figures try to pass these huge ideological concepts as legislation or as new policies, because for anything like this, like whether it's a flat tax or, moving to exclusively a sales tax, or we're going to have across the board huge 25% tariffs, not targeted, we're just going to, base it on rhetoric and vibes, or even like going all the way back to, you remember the 999 tax plan, any of that stuff. The problem is that it doesn't account for the fact that there are cronies, conservative cronies, and friends and supporters of these folks who absolutely expect from day one to be carved out. And I remember being in the state legislature, I think it was like 2009, I'd just gotten there. And I remember we were having this big debate. They were trying to pass a bill that would, I think it was to move us entirely. It was either to move us entirely to a sales tax or to make the state all on a flat tax. I think it was to move everything to sales tax and get rid of the income tax. And I remember a lot of us Democrats were up arguing like, hey, if you do this, you're going to end up screwing a lot of working people. And everybody kept saying, no, that's not going to happen because, see, we're not going to have any carve outs. Everybody's going to pay the exact same thing. It's like, okay. So the bill passed, went on to the state Senate where it died. But the very next bill, like we finished this bill, and the next bill that comes up is a state sales tax holiday for certain industries. And it was like, I remember being like, you just like literally 5 minutes ago, you said there will be no carve outs. You've already got one lined up. I remember like working on ethics bills and having people from powerful industries come up to me and my Republican co-sponsor and be like, hey, we're super supportive of this campaign finance bill. You're going to carve us out of it though, right? It was like, it's an ethics bill.
I used to see this, I'm a big school choice guy, but we used to pass these bills in Tennessee and Mississippi where the rural areas didn't want charter schools.
Right.
Now, one could make a substantive argument that you need a certain amount of scale to for it to make sense and all that kind of stuff, but it never sat well with me. It's like, I believe in it. And if you believe in it, you should want it for your community too. And the more pernicious versions of these are like takeover, like district takeover legislation that specifically overlooks underperformance of rural districts. So they basically just want to go after urban Democratic areas to take them over, which has definitely been a feature of places like Texas. So that never sits well with me either. Now, this is the economy. The EU has its own retaliatory measures going on. This is happening as Congress is debating what to do on spending. And I think what we're seeing here is panic on the right, which is if you already have a backsliding stock market, you've got jittery inflation, you've got economic uncertainty, you've got every economic luminary essentially out there saying that they're worried about a recession, and you've got an erratic president, and you've got Doge cuts, which, as we've established, are pulling back funding and adding more uncertainty, and that has economic effects. It's essentially austerity, as our friend, the Mets owner, said last week in the clip that we shared. I guess my new team, Jason, as we have established on a different podcast.
I support you switching. Not for him. Well, I mean,
I don't mind. Look, deeper pockets than the Steinbrenner family, it seems, at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. We could do a whole thing on this, but it's for another show.
Yeah, subscribe to The Game Within, wherever you get your podcasts. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So we got this basically they're panicking. They can't have a government shutdown amidst all this other stuff, both economically, but also because of the chaos it would imply. So
yeah, they're in charge of everything.
Yeah, this is what happens. And we'll get to some of the more fun elements of what it means for them to be in charge of everything. But the reality here, and Politico had a really funny article about this, which is how all these like hardline conservatives who, as a matter of principle, were against continuing resolutions are all on record now supporting this bill that passed the House, which gives like a few weeks, I think like 6-week extension. And they're pressed to be like, hey, you always said you were against this. And in many ways, this is your identity. This is like whatever whatever the caucus is, the fucking bald eagle caucus or whatever they call it. It's like whatever your caucus is that was created explicitly for the
yellow ribbons and freedom fries caucus.
Yeah, that caucus. They're all like, well, Trump is a nice guy. And he reassured me that this was really important. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's where your principles end, is because some guy called you up and flattered you.
Yeah, I'm afraid of Elon Musk and Trump's. So I'm on board. I've seen the light. It's different when Trump does it. It's different when it's a continuing resolution when Trump does it. There's also, of course, this problem now that the Senate Democrats have of whether or not to step in. Why does this happen constantly to us? Of like, well, the Republicans have stepped on their junk, and now it's up to Democrats to decide whether, for the good of the country and to stop a shutdown, should they step in and help. And you got a real moral dilemma here, right? Because on the one hand, politically, it just makes sense to say, well, y'all are screwed. Right?
I'm a big no on this one. Yeah, we'll get to that. But yeah.
But here's the problem. Here's the problem. If you shut down the government in the age of Doge, when they're trying to cut everything, right? Well, one, I mean, you have the problem of shutting down the government anyway. It hurts people every time you do, right? So there's that. Like that, let's stipulate to that's part of the moral dilemma. And then there's the concern of like, if you shut down the government when they're doging the hell out of things, are you just empowering them to doge like crazy without oversight, to do whatever the hell they want, because they're sending people home anyway, not paying them, and then they're like, just don't come back. It's a real moral quandary, I think.
Well, yeah, let me make my case for a version of the vote no argument. Number one, as you mentioned, the politics, right? Like if you were only interested in the success of your political party and the demise of your opponents, I think it's pretty clear that's the smart thing to do. Now, once you bring in the question of ethics and morals, which unfortunately we're Democrats, and this is a thing that we consider, I still think it makes sense to have a variant of the vote no strategy. And the way I look at it is like vote no unless they really give you a meaningful concession. Yeah. And that concession should involve Doge. It should be like, look, like they're like create a list. Like we need proof that funding is flowing on these, prioritize the top 10 things that you need to make sure that funding is
I'll
flowing.
give you a couple of things. Here's what I'd want from the administration, in no particular order. People who live in DC told me that part of this current budget cuts like $100 million or something like that that's already been raised by DC taxpayers out of the budget, which is not fair. But here's one of my things. There's a bunch of court orders in place that the Trump administration is ignoring right now. So, for instance, there's a court order in place that says shutting down the U.S. refugee program, that you don't have the authority to do that, that you don't have the authority to tell 1,600 Afghan allies who are in hiding and thought they were about to fly out of Afghanistan to come here, that they can't come here now because the law says that this program exists and the law says that you have to administer it. And a court has said you can't stop, right? The court has said you can't stop giving out this foreign aid that Congress has appropriated. You can't just stop doing it unilaterally. And they're ignoring those court orders. So that would be at the top of my list. I'd be like, you want my vote on this? Like, you're going to comply with the court orders that are in place right now.
Yeah, you build it into the law, which is like, look, this is a 6-week reprieve, but if there's like any credible yada yada, like, you know, we like set up some kind of like mechanism to confirm this. If the Congressional Budget Office or something confirms that any funding of these categories isn't reaching its recipients in a timely manner, then we are back to a shutdown. I don't know, like whatever way you craft that, you have to be like pretty crafty about it. But also, like, what the benefit of 6 weeks is, you can be back there in 6 weeks. So if they break that promise, no matter what the enforcement mechanism, you could be back at the table. The problem is, and why I'm I'm lean heavy no without some really serious guarantees, is none of these people could be trusted.
Right.
And they can't even be trusted to follow the law. So like even writing a law, like that's part of what I would be like sitting around the table. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, this is like international relations. I had a professor once said it's international suggestions is what he called it. I'd be like, what is this? Like, this is, we're just kind of advising your king, right? Like, this is like, so like, let's just write it on toilet paper and send it up Pennsylvania Avenue. What does it even matter here?
Let's be really clear about politically what is happening right now, because we've seen it, right? Like the Republicans, when they were shutting down the government while Biden was in charge, when they were threatening to shut down the government while Biden was in charge, we kept wanting the American people to look at that and hold Republicans accountable for it. And they just didn't. It just didn't happen. Because when you are not in an election season, the vast majority, people think that, I've said this a million times, but people think that swing voters are swing voters because they're ideologically in the middle. Sometimes that's true. Usually they're swing voters because they have opinions, but they're not tightly held, right? They're loosely held opinions, and they engage closer to election time. And what that means is that other than right at election time, they're not going to engage at such a focused level that they're always going to properly assign blame. Look at the immigration debate from the last campaign, right? We know that it was the Republicans who tanked a good immigration bill, but then the Republicans benefited from, a lack of action on immigration, because a lot of those people who swing the election are just not engaged at that level. And if that's the case, that means that politically, Democrats hold all the cards here, because Republicans control everything, and they will own this, and they won't be able to get away with just blaming the Democrats for the government shutting down. Maybe with the base, but not with everybody else.
This is a variant of like the what do we do at the joint session speech stuff that we were talking about last week, where you're like, you were making the argument like the base like kind of wants people to show fight or whatever. The reviews post that have been very harsh as I was watching them, in terms of like the way like people are talking about what people in the chamber did or whatever. And I expressed my views. It's like, I felt like in the end, it didn't matter that much. Nobody's going to remember all that kind of stuff. This is the real fight, this is where you and I think are aligned, which is like, this is where like actually fighting, it lines up well, like the base is going to be asking for it. If you're a member listening to this, look, and I'm no lefty, but I'm like, if my member were like, Jared Golden or what's his name? The guy
You're pretty lefty. I mean, by regular standards, you're a lefty, just not by.
Well, you know, I'm not like an AOC Democrat. I'm usually
right.
like I'm kind of, people would probably pen me as a centrist. I'm like, if you're kind of laying down on this one, I would support a primary challenge to you. If you're not taking these kind of fights on like the right way, this is why you're there right now, is to be smart about this kind of stuff.
Let me be clear though. Let's. I understand you feel like a centrist because of the podcast world that we live in, but by any basic American standard, you and I are both lefties.
I think of myself as like a Jared Polis Democrat, which however people would put, it's like a libertarian adjacent Democrat, but with
and I would posit to you that 40+% of his constituents consider him to be a crazy liberal, is my point.
Yeah, but my point being,
yeah, sure.
Maybe a better way of putting it is I'm often critical of the activist wing of our party.
I
am with them on this one, which is that you do not lay down on this. You do not, like, you don't hem and haw and worry about what the editorial pages of yada yada think about you. You actually just fight and hold out and don't negotiate with yourself on this one. I think it's really important. This particular fork in the road is critical, because if you lay down now and you build that muscle memory and do what people like Fetterman are asking, which is like, be the quote unquote responsible adults, which I think is the wrong way of looking at it. I don't think that's an accurate way of portraying this. Then this is how all these fights will play out. Once you do it once, it is how it will happen for the rest of this administration.
They can do whatever they want if we're saving them.
Yes.
And the only way to keep them from doing whatever they want is to sometimes not save them.
Yes.
Right. So, all right. I want to go where all this is leading. So I want us to take a break, and then I want us to talk about these poll numbers on the economy that are actually very bad for Trump and should be very encouraging for our audience. So stick around after we sell you some stuff.
When your car breaks down, you take it to a mechanic with no hesitation. You need it, and it's not something that you could fix yourself. And men should think the exact same way about ED. But the reality is that you might be hesitant to seek help. Thankfully, through HIMS, you can get access to personalized ED treatment without stepping outside your door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatment from the comfort of your couch. And HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for the uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. And no insurance is needed. One low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/majority. The products mentioned are chewable, compounded products which are not provided or not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
All right. All of this chaos is having an effect. People are noticing. Americans are not impressed with President Trump's stewardship of the economy. This is a new CNN poll. It has him underwater on the top issue, the economy, even though his ratings among the best, this is always what's rated the best. His whole time as president, first time, second time. As markets slide and investors worry in response to Trump's trade policies, a 56% majority of the public disapproves of his handling of the economy, which is worse than at any point during his first term in office. And if y'all recall, we had a pandemic that was very bad for the economy during his first term in office. So this is worse than at any point during his first term in office. By contrast, the 51% who now say they approve of his work on immigration, which is headlined by stricter enforcement efforts, is 7 points higher than at any point during his first term. Economic concerns continue to dominate the poll finds, with 42% of Americans choosing the economy as their top issue from a list of 7, more than doubling the share who picked any other issue, including the state of U.S. democracy, which is 19%, the way the federal government works, 14%, immigration, 12%. So let's pay attention to that. He's gone up 7 points on his handling of immigration, but only 12% of people have that as their top issue. Healthcare is 6%, foreign policy 3%, climate change 2%. So I'll stop there. We can get into some more numbers in a second, but that seems bad for him.
Yeah, it's funny. Like let's pretend that he solved the border crisis, which, inevitably whenever Trump is in office, there's always going to be an effect no matter what he's doing, because people are going to be less likely to cross for a lot of reasons. But I think it's probably stipulated that they're going to be way stricter, including, like, in some cases, ignoring certain laws, or removing protected status of schools that people would be critical of. But this is a big thing, right? Like he's gonna quote unquote solve immigration and stipulate that he tanked the bipartisan bill and yada yada yada. All of that being true, the downside of that is that it becomes less of an issue for people once they think you've solved it, or you actually did solve it. People no longer are going to make it their number one issue. And my critique of them is, there was very real immigration issues going on in this country, but they hyped them up to such a degree that once you get into power and you quote unquote solve it in people's minds, which I think is part of what's going on here, there's no longer the motivation for people to care about it anymore, unless you then try to make it like, oh, if these bums get back in power, it's going to be crazy. But if you could just flip a switch like this to solve it, it's like, it's just not this crisis anymore. Whereas the economy, in contrast to the pandemic,
is always an issue.
And this is not an external event. People, I think, understandably looked at Trump on, no matter how chaotic some of his pandemic policies were, the economy was going to get crushed no matter what, and people understood that. This is a crisis of Trump's making. Yes, and this is going to be hard for him to dig himself out of.
And he promised a certain thing on the economy, and he raised expectations. There are people, I promise you, who did not vote for Trump, who voted for Harris, who are wealthier or at least middle class, who are like, well, he is probably going to be better for me on the economy. And he's not even been good for those. You know what I mean? So imagine if you did vote for him, what your expectations were. And also the problem that he has with immigration now is if you are saying, I'm doing all these things and it's going to solve it, and then you want to keep the boogeyman around, the immigration boogeyman around as an issue for the midterms, well, then your narrative has to be, I'm trying to do these things, but the Democrats are stopping me. Well, if you go 2 years saying I'm trying to do these things and the Democrats are stopping me, then you run into the problem of people will stop voting on that issue because they will give up on the idea that you can actually do anything. And I think the most analogous issue for that, for us, sadly, is guns, because the majority of Americans, vast majority of Americans, agree with what the Democrats have wanted to do on guns and on climate. I would say, I think these are both very similar. And then Joe Biden, he tries to do a lot of things on both of those, and he gets basically nowhere with it, right? And so I think a lot of those people stopped voting on those issues, even though they didn't stop agreeing with Biden on those issues, and they didn't stop blaming the Republicans for it. But they just go, well, it's a sunk cost. It's not going to happen. So why would I base my vote on it? It's unrealistic. And he can end up in that place on immigration if he vilifies the Democrats too much for his lack of progress. So he has to pretend he's made a lot of progress, and then it gets harder to run on it.
Yeah, and what was interesting about the CNN write-up is that they said that his approval rating is 45% versus 54% disapprove. And if you read that on Facebook, you're like, oh, that looks bad. And it is. But he has had such bad historic approval ratings that's actually among the best approval rating he's ever had. And so I think we should watch this, because essentially what the polls are saying, if you read it carefully, this is my assessment of it, is that people voted on the economy. It's becoming more of an issue for them. They are not impressed with what Trump is doing. They do like some of the vibes on other things. They like his take charge nature is kind of how I read some of the other stuff. There's stuff that we didn't talk about in terms of like the ahistoric nature at which he seized power. We talked about this last week. I see these memes even on the left where people are like, I wish Biden would like be more like directive and yada, yada. I mean, ignoring, as we talked about last week, the fact that like we believe in laws and a lot of this stuff is show, right? Which I guess some people want more show, but I think people forget that Biden tried things like student loan forgiveness.
Exactly. The courts just wouldn't let him do it. And
and then there were other things he did that people just forget, like the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, and keep going, right? Okay, now let's get to another part of this poll, which is interesting, which is on one Elon Musk. Just 35% of Americans express a positive view of Musk, with 53% rating him negatively, and only 11% having no opinion of him, right? So now Vance has really underwater numbers. 33% of people rate him favorably, 44% unfavorably, but there are 23% of no opinion of him. So more than double the amount of people who have no opinion of Musk. So Musk is a much more prominent figure in this country than JD Vance is. This is a problem for Republicans, and a lot of Republicans will admit it. Like they're worried about Musk's branding and how it's grafting onto Trump. And there's been this parlor game of like, when is Trump going to ditch Musk? And maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. It all depends on the nature of the relationship. This is a financial relationship, which makes you think there's some durability to it.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's going to break. I mean, he just put $100 million more into the Trump political operation last week. And Donald Trump is looking at this going, well, in a few years, I'm not going to be president. And
I need the richest man in the world.
I need the richest man in the world on my side. I need him on my side for the next administration so that I can get any pardons I might possibly need. I need him on my side for my family. I need him on my side because we want to buy more stuff. I mean, I think he wants a full merger with Musk, as evidenced by the fact that he started hawking Teslas at the White House this week. Should we just watch that depressing
Yes, let's do
thing?
it.
Let's do it.
So all these cars won incredible awards. So they're great cars and they're American made. And I think, try it. You'll like it.
This is Musk and Trump in front of the White House with Teslas, by the way.
We have to celebrate somebody that has the courage to do this. He could have said, I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to get involved. Let the country go to hell. He didn't want to do that. And remember, he's going to find, and we're up to almost $500 billion worth of waste and fraud. And if it was $500 billion, we're giving $2 billion here, $2 billion there, not millions. It was a bet. If it was $1 million or $2 million, that's a lot of money. But we're talking about billions of dollars being given to defunct, scams, given to people with nothing. They have nothing going. They open up a subchapter S corporation, and they put $2 billion into it from nowhere.
Again, for those who were only listening, this was apparently during the visitation period for Trump or for Musk and his son. So I guess I don't know how it works. Maybe they meet at a McDonald's and the social services lady comes along and then they go to an event at the White House. I think that's monthly how he sees his kid, I'm guessing, because the other clips I've seen, you and I just on our other show talked about yesterday about whether it's okay to critique somebody's parenting. I feel very comfortable critiquing the parenting of Elon Musk, given that he has been prolific but not attentive as a parent. So all that said, I like how Trump continues to just throw out numbers that are meaningless, like 500 billion. I mean, they're just out of thin air. He just pulls them out of thin air. But it is Trump and Musk standing with a bunch of Teslas and Musk doing a commercial. It's like, I try not to get too aggravated about it because it's not surprising, but it is like Democrats, if you're listening, this is what you talk about when you talk about official corruption. You take this super unpopular guy who has basically become the vice president or co-president, really, of the United States, and you talk about the fact that he paid $300 million to buy his way into doing whatever he wants. And what he's getting in return is government contracts and the president of the United States selling cars for him.
And the context here is that Tesla stock has been tanking, right? That's the context here. And, essentially what Trump is trying to do here, and this clip tells us a lot, as silly as the clip is. It tells us that this relationship is going to endure for at least a while, because you don't bring him out in front of the White House and try to sell his cars unless you are pretty airtight on this kind of stuff. And what he's trying to do is like the reverse Bud Light. He's trying to say, okay, all these liberals are no longer buying Tesla, and that is your market, right? So I need to create a new market for you. So the kind of people who are buying big pickup trucks, Ford F-150s or whatever crazy big truck you had that exploded. Like
I have another one now.
I
had to replace it. I am a Ford guy.
But what you probably don't see in a lot of neighborhoods in Missouri are Teslas. And I actually like Trump he's got such brand cachet on the right. Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked if you saw an uptick. Do I think it's going to be enough to make up?
There will be.
Yeah, is it enough to make up for the actual like pretty strict boycott I think you're going to see on the left? Like, I think boycotts generally don't work. This is an exception because I think it's just so one-to-one here. Like the Tesla brand is so much associated with Musk. It's why, for instance, when I mentioned on a different pod like that, if Musk bought the Bills, I would stop rooting for the Bills. It's just too one-to-one. Like he's not your normal CEO.
Here's why this boycott is more than a boycott. And why I think it's having such an effect is because, like, for instance, a lot of people have a lot of issues with Amazon, rightfully so. Like Bezos is doing with the Washington Post and everything else. But Amazon has made itself ubiquitous in American life, and it is at this point, sadly, it is inconvenient to not use Amazon at times. Not to mention the fact that if you do get Amazon deliveries, your neighbors see it, but that's it, right? People see what car you drive, and if at this point, and I don't feel great about this, but when I see a Tesla, when I see someone in a Tesla, I make an assumption about the political views, and honestly, at this point, I hate to say it, but the character a bit of the person. Now, I know that a lot of people bought it before all this came along and that kind of thing.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah.
But when I see a Cybertruck, I am like, you knew when you bought it. And also, that's not a truck. That's an El Camino, and it looks ridiculous. And it's an insult to El Caminos. But so I do judge that. And so this is the president of the United States doing an ad at the White House for a guy who sells overpriced, overpriced, not overrated cars that are assembled by non-union workers that are underpaid. And he is a big union buster. So, if you're listening to this and you own a Tesla and you're trying to figure out what to do, go get your ass a Ford or a Chevy or whatever. Like, go get an American car. I mean, the Ford's making a Mustang now that is basically the Tesla. It's just not made by this guy. So I think I think that the boycott from the left will endure. And I do think that they will be successful in somewhat making up for it here.
And something about the way that the finances work for these billionaires, especially like somebody like Musk, who's entangled with a lot of things. Yes, he's worth a lot of money, but a lot of stuff is entangled with stock options and things like that. And the less liquid he gets, the more control he has to give up over his companies, and the more tight he gets, which means the less money he has to throw around for political causes and just the more general stress you cause him. So it definitely feels like the kind of thing that you should keep at it. If I were the kind of person to purchase cars, I would certainly forego my Tesla this year. I've always wondered why they never had a motorcycle. If they had a Tesla motorcycle before all this, I would have bought a Tesla motorcycle. That would be a cool. That would, I hope as long as it's not like a Cybertruck boxy looking thing. Okay, this is all a wind up to say that Musk is one of the reasons why Musk's numbers are so bad. Is because it's more than just liberals critiquing him. It's more than just the mainstream media. A lot of like sort of counterculture figures, comedians, sports people are railing against Musk. The most notable here is Bill Burr. And before we play this clip, there's a lot of curse words and just words that we don't use on this podcast here. So if you got kids in the car or whatever, you might want to just fast forward past this.
Yeah, it's Bill Burr.
Next clip.
Just know you're about to hear Bill Burr. So
let's go to this clip.
For fucking Sieg Heiling, not once but twice. And I never look at my emails. I was scrolling through my emails and it said my Twitter account had been flagged for I don't even tweet anymore. It had been flagged for it. What a fucking baby. Just like Hitler. A fucking baby. How about the fact that the Twitter guy he's not even from here. He's from South Africa. He comes to this country and wants to turn it into a fucking dictatorship. He doesn't feel that we deserve democracy. Can you just imagine doing that? Going to another country and just deciding, yeah, you know what? I'm going to change this form of government because I've decided. Yeah, he doesn't mind living under a dictatorship as long as he's on the good side of it. Fucking laminated face cunt. Because that's another thing. All of these people that are into fucking Hitler, you know what I mean? And like, look at this guy like he was some sort of fucking hero. The guy's one of the biggest fucking cowards ever. All the pain and all the suffering that guy's caused and the war crimes the Allies had to commit, firebombing fucking cities to get that motherfucker. When it came time for him to pay the price for all the suffering he caused millions and millions and millions of people. Did he face the music? No, he gave himself a nice, quick, painless fucking death. That's your fucking hero? Fucking coward is what he was.
So, okay, let's put this in context. Bill Burr, you can't say he's on the right. You can't really say he's on the left. He's been a guy he's, I think, a pretty good avatar for sort of that swing white male American voter, right? It's like, he doesn't want to be told what words he cannot say. And he also is a guy who he happens to, I listen to Bill Burr and to that show, his podcast, pretty frequently. And he cares a lot about the environment. He was at times a Bernie guy. You know, he talks a lot about the big, the big collection of trash in the ocean. It really bothers him, you know? So like,
he's a Luigi, he's a free Luigi guy. So he's at odds with also that. He goes on Rogan.
Yeah, he goes on Rogan. I'm not sure. I don't view him. He does a lot of material about guns, and I don't see him as super anti-gun. I think he's like, I mean, he's a pretty politically, he's a pretty down the middle normal dude. He knows what he thinks about certain things. There's a lot of stuff he doesn't care about. And I think this is a really interesting canary in the coal mine, because this is what we've been talking about, that Elon Musk is not likable. Elon Musk has made himself the center of the Republican Party in this country, and he is loved by conservative bros who worship wealth. What that means is he is not something that the Republican Party can escape politically. It's not escapable for them. They own him for years. And guys like Bill Burr, who I think are guys who are willing to vote for either party, look at Elon Musk and go, this guy is screwing us. And I think that we should pay attention to that, and we should amplify it.
Yeah, here's like a somewhat like edgy way of thinking about it. And I only advocate for this if certain things happen, but so much of our attention is on Trump, and understandably, like the weaker he is, the better off this country is in many ways because of the destructive things he's trying to do. But there's also a world in which you think about what comes next. And who do we know is going to be next up? Well, Vance and Musk, really. That's how I think about it. Vance, Musk, and then the Republican Party. Sometimes Trump's goals are not the same as the goals of those other people, right? Like,
well,
Trump's
frankly,
goals are
when they are the same, it's a coincidence.
Yes, totally. Right now, Trump's goals are very narrow: enrich himself and like have fun doing whatever shit he's doing, right?
Build a legacy and retaliate against the people who he doesn't like.
And remember how we left the Obama administration, right? Obama popular, Hillary, the Democratic Party, not as great, right? Mm-hmm. So that gives us a sense of what this could look like in a couple of years, which is Vance unpopular, and Vance is viewing out of step even with Trumpism, right? Like, get used to talking that way, right? Like, if you talk to people in your life who love Trump, ask yourself how much is riding on you actually like untangling them from Trump, and actually how much can you seize an opportunity like people's hatred of Musk and perhaps their lack of opinion on somebody like Vance to say that's the terrain we could fight now on instead of Trump. So that brings me to the next sort of pop culture part.
Hold on. Before we go there, let me expound on that a little, because for years, the way that we beat the Republicans was that we owned the populist space. And for us to get back in the position we were in, we have to either make serious inroads with, or maybe even start to win working class Americans again. And the way we did that for years is that there was a basic popular culture understanding of the two parties in this country. And that was that if you worked for a living, then you had no love for the corporate class, right? Like there was no reason for you, if you weren't signing a paycheck, but instead you were getting a paycheck, why would you love the people who own, all the corporations and stuff? And then what happened? The Republicans, through Trump and through, The Apprentice and all of his persona, have managed to really change that, right? Musk represents a huge Achilles heel for them because he is now they have done a good job of making us seem like the corporate class, making the Democrats seem like the corporate class, because they've made DEI and wokeness, it's all bullshit, but they've made it synonymous with corporatism and, boring ties and white collar world. But Musk is a different version of the same thing. Musk is the richest man in the world. He is the richest man in the world who doesn't care about his children, who doesn't care about you. No, there are very few people out there who are not already in the tank for MAGA who are like, Elon Musk cares about people like me.
Yes.
And the reason that they had no choice but to hang on to the corporate class for so long is because that's who was funding their campaigns. And what is Musk doing? He's funding their campaigns.
Well, this reminds me of a clip that for some reason I can't find it. It's on Fox Business, but they've paywalled it or something. But on Dave Portnoy, was at a Barstool Sports, who I think explicitly is a Trump supporter, but is a irreverent guy, to say the least. Mm-hmm. Went on Fox Business, and Stuart Varney on Fox Business asked him, do you think maybe Musk is too busy with Doge and that's why Tesla is down so much? And this is what Dave Portnoy said. He said, so I'm a big stockholder of Tesla, and I certainly raised my eyebrows. I like Doge. I like what they're doing. But let me tell you this. If you're going to send out, and you got to call it both ways. If you're going to send emails to federal workers and say, what have you done for the last 5 days? I think Tesla's shareholders are entitled to ask their CEO, Elon Musk, what have you done for Tesla the last 5 days? I mean, it's seemingly all he cares about right now is Doge. Now, it could be a coincidence that the stock is down 25% since he really started this, I guess. But I think it's fair as a shareholder of Tesla to say, what are you doing for Tesla shareholders now? Maybe you're greasing the wheels and you'll get some deals through the government. I don't know, but it's certainly inbounds to ask Elon Musk, what are you doing for Tesla right now? And I find this interesting because, we're not on the same page as Portnoy on Doge yet, but he's looking at somebody like Musk, and these figures like Bill Burr and Portnoy, who are very different people. So I don't want to say they're the same kind of people, but a lot of these people have made a name for themselves by being no bullshit. And right now we're finding out who's the no bullshit and who's the bullshit version of that. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding is that some of these people with huge followings, and Portnoy is one of these people who just doesn't have to answer to anybody anymore.
Yep.
Is now an inconvenience to the people who used to be in his good graces when they appeared the right to be the people calling bullshit on us. And this is a huge opportunity for us. And my big request of our audience is, yes, there are lots of things about Dave Portnoy and maybe Bill Burr and others that you aren't perfect for you. But I really think it's important for us to enter this particular part of the web and the cultural conversation in as friendly a way as possible, because these people could be our allies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's math.
Yes.
If you want to win, you got to get as many people in your camp as you possibly can. So this is Ravi, this may be the first show we've done since the election where I feel like there's some hope and some silver linings and some good news. We
know what our job is. It's always good to wake up. Sometimes you wake up and you're like, I don't know what to do. And I felt that way a lot of these weeks. I think right now, the past few weeks, I think it's come into view. All right, what is our job? What is the story we are telling about this country? And it is becoming clear. And right now we got to get out there and we got to do it. And we can't get in our own way here. That's the key.
Yeah. All right. So that's the show for this week. What else is going on with you? You're still in New Orleans?
I'm in New Orleans. You know, it's funny. My dad. I'm going to Colorado tonight to do like a retreat with a bunch of my friends from law school. A lot of them coming out of the Biden administration, so it'll be interesting to hear from them. We do it once a year, but I haven't done it since like the Bush administration, because they used to go to Vegas, and I don't really like Vegas, and now they're doing Breckenridge, Colorado, so it's gonna be fun. But my dad was in New Orleans the other day because he flies through New Orleans to go to Alabama, where he still does a little bit of medical work, and we have breakfast, and he goes to pay for the breakfast, and his wallet is a Ziploc bag full of cash and pills. Like not like bad pills. He's not like a drug addict or anything, but it's like his statins and shit.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, you know, once an immigrant, always an immigrant. Like this guy was never, this guy's been practicing medicine in this country since the 70s. And is by all means, like, you know,
You're not going to fool me into buying a wallet. You may get some of these other suckers, but I don't need it.
It just made me laugh so much.
That's
my
just
dad
like
is
my in-laws.
You know, I know I'm hard on my dad sometimes, but he really is a genuinely funny character. And the other thing was funny is I think he listens to this podcast because he was like, I was listening to one of your podcasts the other day, and he was like, I hear you're in New Orleans, and I realized this is how my parents find out about where I am is through this particular segment of Majority 54.
That's funny. I wonder if he just fast forwards to the end.
But you've got a big week ahead here. I don't know if we're talking about it on air.
Yeah, sure. So I have today is Wednesday. We're streaming live, and I'm having hernia surgery on Friday morning. Be careful with your lifts, folks. And it's currently pretty uncomfortable. Not probably as uncomfortable as it'll be over the weekend. But I will say. I know a lot of people have anxiety about general anesthesia and surgery and that kind of thing, and I do too. But I have found that post-traumatic stress, as much as I've done to deal and address post-traumatic stress that I have, post-traumatic stress and the desire to not lose control of your situation and the concept of going under for general anesthesia, they don't go well together. And I am experiencing a fair amount of, I'm not anxious about the surgery. Interestingly, I'm completely fine with the fact that like I'm getting abdominal surgery. They're going to cut into my abdomen, you know, laparoscopically, but still. And I understand that I'll be in a fair amount of pain for a few days afterwards. And I have a pretty aggressive rehab schedule after that. And I'm doing all those things to make sure I can get back and play baseball by May. None of that is all that concerning to me. It is literally just like the process of quote unquote going under. Even the term, I'm pretty freaked out, and I've done it before. You know, I've had surgery before, but anyway. So
good luck, man.
Have you had surgery before?
No,
of course not.
No, knock on wood. I will one day.
Yeah,
I'm sure. Yeah,
I would, and, you know, and the whole thing is they're like, well, look, you get there and then we're going to give you medicine and make you feel better. And I'm like, okay, cool. But they can't give it to you until you've seen the doctor and the anesthesiologist. And I was like, look, if I had my druthers, I would like, you know, my wife's driving me there anyway. I would just take a gummy and then I'd be good. And they're like, no, you can't do that. And I understand why, but.
You remind me, by the way, I was interviewing this guy the other day in New Orleans. Pediatrician. Everybody's like, he's not a pediatrician, he is the pediatrician in New Orleans. I'm like, what does that mean? So I go to meet him, and he has a whole children's hospital named after him, but he still practices medicine. I'm like, this guy's an interesting guy. And he gives me all morning. Like, not only do I interview him, but he walks me to the Starbucks when we're talking. And as I'm walking to the Starbucks, he's like, the Manning name is on the hospital. And he's like, yeah, you know, what a great family. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. They are from here. And he proceeds to tell me how he has been the pediatrician to every Manning child, including Arch, the new kid. And I'm like, man, there's still communities like this out there. Like, we're just like the guys, like everybody's, you know, he's like Moonlight Graham. This kind of was his vibe. I just loved it. I said this the other day, and I had drinks with my buddy last night who listened to a pod. It's my buddy's from Mississippi. Shout out to Matty B. But he was like, I was listening to your pod the other day, and he was like, you were talking about New Orleans. He's like, man, I agree. He's like, this place is so distinct. And I feel that way every time I interact with anybody who's from this town. It's just like everybody here is just a 10 out of 10 personality. So
it seems to be one of the top places that people work very hard to return to. If they, they go out, they have careers, they do things, and they are usually pretty set on getting back there, and more often than not, they seem to.
Yes.
So there's a lot of people who have a lot of worldly experiences and then have decided to return. So
I'm trying to tell that story because that is in part the story of Katrina and the education system. Is a lot of people had to leave and come back, and some of them had left for various reasons and are back. Like there's a guy I was interviewing the other day who his dad gets pancreatic cancer in June of 2005. Within like 2 months, his dad dies. Like a week later, Katrina hits, and he had been in New York or something, pursuing an acting career and a career in consulting, and he comes back to New Orleans, and it's like part of his story is like how he reconnected with the school system and all that. And it's like everybody talked to has some kind of story like that. Like they could tell you to the minute when they heard about Katrina or when they experienced it if they were still here.
And this is all going to be for a podcast, right? A podcast series?
Yeah, narrative, probably like a 6-episode pod.
Cool.
Yeah, so looking forward to it. There's some real heroes out here. It is an inspiring story about how everybody came together and hashed out. There are a lot of debates, a lot of discussions got really heated, but the end result is pretty magical in terms of what they've been able to do. And I'm just focusing on education, but like I'm reminded, when I was at that children's hospital or I'm talking to business owners and stuff, just like how resilient this community has been and how proud it is.
Well, speaking of other podcasts, Ravi and I do on Tuesdays with Adisu Demisi. We're now doing on Valor Media Network, The Game Within, and it streams live 3:30 Central on Tuesdays, drops on audio on Tuesday evenings. Go on audio, go on YouTube, subscribe to The Game Within, subscribe to the Valor Media Network. I think, honestly, it's a pretty good show. Like, it's
have so much fun.
Yeah, it's how politics and business interact with sports and how sports influences our politics. Look, if you like this show, I think you're going to like that show. We've been enjoying doing it a lot. So, and then one more time, tell them your book stuff. Yes,
Garbage Town. Get the book wherever you buy your books. You can pre-order it and go to garbagetownbook.com. You could see those 3 events that I talked about. But you can also Google, St. Louis book event with our names in it, or Staten Island, or New York, or just look at any of our socials. I've been tweeting about it. You've been tweeting about it. And we'd love to see you. We haven't done anything live since the pandemic when we were in Kansas City. Yeah,
that's right. So. Okay. So please leave a 5-star review here. Please go check out The Game Within. Please come see us at Ravi's events. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere. You can find me at Jason Kander everywhere. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.